Judgment, original meaning versus lost meaning. Part D, Aramaic din, God's sovereign verdict, Daniel 7:22. By the time of Israel's exile, much of the Old Testament record was being written in Aramaic, the language of empire. In this context, the word for judgment becomes din, a term drawn from the legal courts of the ancient world. Din conveys the sense of a verdict being rendered in a courtroom, but unlike the corrupt systems of men, this is the sovereign verdict of Almighty God. Daniel's visions highlight this contrast with striking clarity. In chapter 6, Daniel himself is condemned in a human court, a court manipulated by envy, deception, and injustice. The king's hands are tied by his own flawed law, and Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. Human courts, though clothed with authority, are vulnerable to corruption and error, but in chapter 7 the scene shifts to the heavenly court. The Ancient of Days takes his seat, the books are opened, and judgment din is set. Daniel 7:10. Here there is no bribery, no manipulation, no error. God's courtroom is perfect and his verdict is final. The climactic moment comes in verse 22. Judgment din was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. The outcome of God's judgment is not despair, but hope. His verdict vindicates his people, strips power from the oppressors, and establishes his kingdom forever. This truth is critical for understanding biblical judgment. Unlike human condemnation, which is often rooted in corruption or self-interest, divine judgment flows from God's holiness and justice. It exposes wickedness, but it also vindicates the righteous and secures their inheritance. The saints do not cower before God's judgment. They rejoice in it because it brings deliverance and establishes his rule. Modern misuse has reduced judgment to a fearful threat, but in Daniel's vision, din is the assurance of God's perfect justice. The courtroom of heaven is not a place of arbitrary punishment, but the throne of righteousness where God's people are finally defended, delivered, and exalted. In this light, judgment is not merely about God's wrath against sin. It is about his sovereign verdict to set all things right, to silence corruption, and to hand the kingdom into the hands of his saints.